new M2 Pro and Max chips were released earlier this week, and you're probably asking yourself, what I'm asking myself, do I need to upgrade? And the answer probably is no. And I'll tell you why. Now I'm gonna go ahead and take this from a standpoint of a music producer. So if you are strictly making music, then this video is for you. Now I don't wanna waste any of your time. So if you have an M1 Pro, M1 Max laptop, Ultra, definitely you do not need to upgrade. If you still are using the M1 series chipset computers and you're happy with it and you feel like you don't need anything more, trust me, if you'll know when you need something more, then don't upgrade. But if you do feel like you need to upgrade and you want to upgrade, then let's go ahead and get to some shopping. So the M2 Pro and M2 Max are the new super chips for the MacBook Pros. The M2 Pro can go up to 12 core CPU, that's 8 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores, up to a 19 core GPU. Now as music producers, we actually don't really care about the GPU because we pretty much don't utilize that. So anything extra is not going to be seen. So don't waste your money on that. And on the M2 Pros, you get up to 32 gigabits or gigabytes of unified memory and a 200 gigabyte memory bandwidth. Over on the M2 Max, you get the same 12 core CPU, so the 8 performance cores, 4 efficiency cores, up to 38 cores of GPU. Don't need that if you're a music producer, so don't worry about that. Up to 96 GBs of unified memory and a 400 GB per second memory bandwidth. Now, as a music producer, there are a couple things that you want to focus on when you are purchasing a new computer, and that is CPU, RAM, and hard drive space. Now, if I was buying a new computer today, I would definitely compare these three models right here: the MacBook Air M2 and the MacBook Pro M2 Pro or Max chipset. Doesn't matter the screen size because that's completely up to you. If you want a bigger screen or a smaller one, that's up to you. Now, over on the MacBook Air M2, we are looking at an 8-core CPU, which is only 4 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores. Over on the M2 Pro, we can get up to 12 cores, which is 8 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores. Over on the GPU is a 10-core GPU. Now, once again, us as music producers in the music industry, we don't really care about GPU because we're not doing video work. This is strictly for video work. Music apps, plugins, they don't utilize any power from the GPU, so don't worry about that. That's why the MacBook Air could be right for you. Now, here's where it starts to get a little bit tricky. The RAM on the MacBook Air is 24 gigs of RAM, and you can get up to 96 gigs of RAM if you go full out M2 Max. Now, RAM is one of those things where you have to decide if you need more or not. One way to figure that out, if you go ahead and bring up Spotlight or hit Command Spacebar on your computer and type in Activity Monitor, load that up, head on over to the Memory tab over here, and you want to sort of focus on the memory pressure down here in the left-hand corner. While you're running your sessions, while you're running your DAW, if it's a busy one, the better. Take a look at your memory pressure. If it's staying green, that means the amount of RAM that you have in your current setup is good to go. You don't have to worry about upgrading it. But if you're seeing it go into the orange or even possibly into the red, you definitely want to start thinking about upgrading that, because that means you don't have enough RAM in your computer to handle the tasks that you are throwing at it. Now, your computer does benefit from memory swapping as well. So if your RAM fills up, it can utilize some space from your SSD hard drive. But I found that it usually just allows you to double the amount of space that your RAM has. So if you're having 16 gigs of RAM in your computer, it's really just going to memory swap up to 32 gigs is what I found in my test over the year using this computer. Now I have 64 gigs, so it allows me to go 128 gigs, and I pretty much never go there. And finally, the hard drive, you can get up to 2 terabytes of space on the M2 MacBook Air and up to 8 terabytes on the M2 Pro and Max chipsets. So if I was looking at all these specs over here as a music producer, I would go through it and be like, okay, number one, CPU is important to a producer. I'm getting more performance cores on the Pro and Max chipsets. Now, does that mean I should jump up to that level? Maybe. Let's let's continue on. I can only get up to 24 gigs of RAM on the MacBook Air. Now, I did my test, I did my activity monitor, I saw that I was going into the orange and I already have about 16 gigs of RAM. I would probably think about upgrading to at least 32 gigs of RAM, doubling that RAM to give you that more leeway and space in your productions. So that means the MacBook Air M2 is out of the question. So we're left with the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro models. Off the top, you gotta decide, do I want something smaller, more compact, or do I want something bigger? Now this one over here is a 16-inch version, and usually I work with an external monitor, but I found that 16 inches is enough for me just to use the MacBook Pro screen and that screen only. And I'm kind of happy with it. Maybe in the future I will get an external monitor once again, but I'm happy with the way the size is and it just works for me. But let's say you don't want the 16-inch, you want a little bit more portability, even though the 16-inch is really portable. Don't listen to those other reviews, it's portable. It's a little bit bulkier, but it's portable. Now we gotta decide between the Pro chipset or the Max chipset. Pretty much off the bat, the core CPUs are pretty much the same between the Pros and the Max. The only thing you gain with the 12-core CPU is 2 more efficiency cores. You're not getting those performance cores. So how much is that going to sort of show up in your day-to-day operations? I don't know. I think personally the 10-core CPU is enough. 8 performance cores, 2 efficiency cores. That's what I have in my M1 Max chipset, and it's been perfectly fine for me. So if I'm taking a look at this lineup right here under the 14-inch, I'm gonna go ahead and select the first one here, the base model. Let's say I need more than 16 gigs of RAM, so I'm gonna go ahead and upgrade my RAM first. That's the first thing I look to upgrade because I can't upgrade that later. Now that's $400. That brings me up to $23.99. I'm going to leave the CPU at its stock setting because we don't need more GPUs, and I don't care for the extra 2 efficiency cores because I don't know how much that's actually going to show up in performance later on. And then I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to the storage. Let's say I want to get at least 1 terabyte in there. You don't need to. You can get away with 512, I find, but let's say we want it. Now we're at $25.99. If we go back and see the second tier model, the only thing that we're gaining here is the bigger storage space and the more CPU. Now, would it be worth it to gain those extra 2 efficiency cores? Maybe. Because we're already spending $25.99 there, we can go ahead and see how much it is to upgrade the RAM here. And this is how Apple gets you. So I'm going to go ahead and go to 32 gigs of RAM. And now that's a $400 upgrade. And now I'm at $28.99. And all I'm really gaining is 2 efficiency cores and a little bit more cores in the GPU, which I don't even care about. And that means you said, you know what, maybe I can go to the next one, and now you're above 3,000, and that's just too much. So if we just bring it back, be realistic, go back to this one over here, select that, the entry model one, $19.99, CPU as it is stock, perfectly fine in my opinion. Memory, go back to that activity monitor, see what you have right now. If you're constantly in the green and you have 16 gigs, you're good with 16 gigs. Don't worry about upgrading from there. But if you are in the orange, in the red, you definitely want to upgrade to the 32 gigs of RAM, $23.99. The last thing, if you do have some change to spare, I would upgrade to at least 1 terabyte SSD storage. And this would probably be the config for me as a music producer to get today. $25.99 for a crazy computer that can do a lot of video work, by the way, too, if you need to. Now, if RAM wasn't an issue for you and you can get away with, say, 16 gigs of RAM, I wouldn't even spend the extra money to go to the M2 Pro chipset. I would stay on the M2 chipset and just either go for the 16 gigs of RAM or 24 gigs of RAM, and you're saving yourself about $1,000 for performance that you're probably not gonna tell the difference between this chipset or the M2 Pro chipset. Now, I'm not even gonna talk about the Max chipset because that goes crazy. And if you need it, you know you need it. So all that is what I would look at as a music producer today, deciding on what computer to buy and what items to focus on, what's really worth it and what's not. If you do have any questions on this, let's go ahead and chat in the comment section below. Let me know which config you choose today if you had to buy. But again, if you're coming from an M1, M1 Pro, M1 Max, you don't need to upgrade. If you have an Ultra, you definitely don't need to upgrade because that's even wilder. And I'm sure the M2 Ultras are going to come out soon. But as it is now, if you're running an Intel computer, you may want to think about upgrading. But on that, thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one later. Peace.